For 12 years, Marian Ellery had taught village children, without charging those whose parents could not pay. At her father's will reading, that generosity was presented as proof that she deserved nothing. She stood beneath his portrait while rain silvered the windows of Ellery House, and Mr. Pritchard read the final page before assembled relatives, parish officers, and 2 quarry owners whose children Marian had once taught. To my nephew Edmund Vale I leave Ellery House, its lands, securities, and household effects. To my daughter Marian I leave the freehold known as St. Orizon's Chapel School, together with all fixtures and obligations attached thereto. Edmund's mouth curved. Everyone in Aveling knew St. Orizon's, a roofless little chapel joined to a schoolroom, abandoned above the quarry road, with rates unpaid and a demolition order expected before Christmas. Edmund rose before the solicitor could fold the will. My uncle understood at last that sentiment is not stewardship. Marian has squandered her profession upon families who cannot pay. The estate requires a responsible hand. No one challenged him. Marian's father had condemned her for teaching colliers' and quarrymen's children without fees. Now, even from his grave, he had turned her compassion into a public punishment. Mr. Pritchard placed 2 rusted keys and a folded deed on the table. Edmund leaned close enough that only she could hear him. Sign your interest back to me. I will allow you £40 and spare you the rates. £40 would buy a respectable year of quiet dependence. Marian looked at the children's ink-stained exercises still tucked inside her music portfolio. Why purchase something worthless? His smile vanished for one beat. Because ruins are untidy. She took the keys. By dusk she had climbed the quarry road with 1 trunk, a wool blanket, her tuning fork, and her mother's green hymn book. St. Orizon's crouched against the November sky, its limestone walls black with rain. The schoolroom roof sagged. Nettles filled the yard. The chapel's east window had been boarded. Yet the small vestry chimney stood sound, and behind the swollen door waited a narrow iron bed left by the last caretaker. After making the vestry barely habitable, Marian climbed toward the gallery with her lamp shielded in one hand. The great pipe organ waited under a gray skin of dust. Empty mouths showed where pipes had been taken, and newer wooden panels interrupted the old carved oak. Her mother Alice had once played here before illness weakened her hands. The instrument had been declared beyond repair 20 years ago, shortly after Alice's death. Marian pressed middle C. The key descended halfway, then met a firm resistance unlike rot or rust. Beneath her finger lay the measured pull of a spring. When she opened her mother's green hymn book, penciled figures beside 8 tunes caught her attention. They resembled neither fingerings nor hymn numbers. The first sequence matched shallow notches cut into newer wooden trackers behind the keyboard. More troubling was a line written beneath the final hymn. Orison quarterly payment received. The official parish accounts she had seen while teaching listed no educational trust and no such income. Someone hammered on the chapel door. Edmund entered with the parish surveyor, Mr. Crew, and a red notice. Unsafe structure, Crew said without meeting Marian's eyes. Inspection in 30 days. If the roof is not secured, the parish may order demolition. Edmund fixed the notice to the inner panel, then looked toward the open hymn book. His composure tightened before he turned away. Mud marked his boots and, beside the organ stair, another set of wet prints already darkened the dust. After the men departed, Marian wedged the doors, returned to the gallery, and removed the fallboard. Beneath middle C, a slender brass wire did not run toward the pipe chest. It descended through a drilled opening into the gallery floor. The school had been given to her as a grave. Something inside it was still answering. Morning revealed practical misery. 2 roof principals were weakened, half the slates were gone, and water had spoiled the plaster ceiling over the infants' room. Marian had £6 11 shillings in savings. She paid Ezra Pike, a retired quarry carpenter, 15 shillings to brace the worst beam, and promised another £1 when he had covered the opening with salvage slate. Your cousin offered me twice that not to come, Ezra admitted. Made me curious. His granddaughter Nell carried timber scraps. At 12, she had stopped attending school to mind her brothers. Marian asked her to hold the tuning fork while she tested the organ case. Mel's solemn face brightened when the vibration passed into her fingers. Behind the oak facade, Marian found 12 wooden trackers cut newer than the rest. They connected no keys. Each bore shallow groups of notches, 4, then 7, then 2. Her mother's hymn book contained penciled figures beside certain tunes, but Marian had always taken them for fingerings. The first 3 were also 4, 7, and 2. The coincidence was too exact. Still, notes were not proof. Marian sketched the mechanism before touching anything further. For 10 days she made one classroom habitable. She patched windows with oiled cloth, scrubbed soot from the stove, and traded 2 silver hair combs for coal. Ezra completed the roof brace. Nell brought 3 children on the first afternoon, then 9. Marian charged a penny only from families able to pay. She taught letters in the morning and scales after dinner, using a cracked square piano rescued from the vestry. Village opinion did not soften at once. Mrs. Baines at the bakery refused credit. The church warden called the school a vanity. But Samuel Reed, whose injured hand had ended his quarry work, repaired desks in exchange for lessons for his sons. When Marian divided the warm room with a curtain so laborers could learn accounts after dark, he brought lamp oil without being asked. The organ remained her evening work. She discovered that the obstructed C key pulled the brass wire only when the left swell pedal was held down. The wire ended below the gallery in a narrow cavity between the chapel wall and schoolroom chimney. On the exterior, however, Marian measured 9 feet of stone, where the interior accounted for barely 7. She showed Ezra. He tapped the plaster. Old flue, perhaps. A flue would rise. The wire travels down. They lifted one warped board and exposed a zinc tube packed with felt. It had kept the wire dry. Marian stopped Ezra from cutting it open. The workmanship was deliberate. Careless force might destroy whatever waited at the other end. That afternoon, Edmund arrived in a polished carriage. He carried a parish account stating that Marian owed £27 in accumulated rates. "The deed says obligations attached," he said. "Pay in 14 days or sell to me." Marian read the dates. 3 years of charges preceded her ownership, but the paper named no rated occupier. "I will ask Mr. Pritchard for the original assessment. He acts for the estate. Then I shall ask the parish clerk." Edmund glanced toward the children singing intervals. His gaze climbed to the gallery. "You mistake stubbornness for courage, cousin." After he left, Marian found the organ bench shifted 2 inches and fresh scratches around its lock. Nothing obvious had been taken. She slept thereafter with the hymn book beneath her pillow. The parish clerk, Thomas Fenn, was a nervous young man with red ink on his cuffs. He permitted Marian to inspect the rate book only after Samuel and 2 parents accompanied her. St. Orison's appeared not as a private school, but as property of the Orison Educational Trust. Payments ceased 20 years before. Later entries had been overwritten, naming the Ellery estate as temporary custodian. "Where is the trust instrument?" Marian asked. Fenn swallowed. "Lost when the old parish office flooded." The flood had occurred 12 years ago. Marian's mother had died 8 years earlier than that. The instrument could have vanished conveniently, but it had not vanished before the organ fell silent. In her mother's hymn book, the penciled numbers ran beside 8 tunes. Marian played their opening phrases on the square piano. The melodies sounded unrelated until Nell, counting beats for the younger pupils, said, "They all pause where Mrs. Ellery wrote the second number." Marian arranged the tunes by the dates printed beneath Alice's notes. The selected notes spelled no words, but their intervals formed directions. Up a 4th, down a 2nd, repeat. They were not a message, they were instructions for keys and pedals. On a cold Sunday evening, Marian climbed to the organ with Ezra and Samuel as witnesses. She pressed the prescribed sequence. Dead keys clicked. The left pedal tightened. At the final chord, a latch sounded inside the wall. A narrow panel behind the lowest pipes released. Within lay a vertical service passage, dry and scarcely shoulder-wide. Its brickwork belonged to the chapel's original construction. The zinc tube descended beside an iron rod to a stone box at floor level. The box contained no jewels. Inside were 8 sealed tin cylinders, a bundle of organ builder's drawings, and a brass plate engraved with the words Orison Pneumatic Register, A. Ellery and J. Harland, 1854. Marian knew the first name. Alice Ellery had been praised as an organist, never as an inventor. One cylinder held tightly rolled parchment. Before Marian could examine its seal, smoke pushed under the schoolroom door. Samuel ran downstairs. A coal scuttle burned against the curtain, flames climbing toward the patched roof. Marian thrust the cylinders into Ezra's arms and led the children's evening class into the yard. Samuel smothered the fire with wet sacking. The damage was limited to the curtain and 3 desks, but the scuttle had been carried from the locked vestry. In the lane, a carriage lamp disappeared toward Ellery House. The constable called it an accident. Marian did not accuse Edmund without evidence. Instead, she moved the cylinders to 3 separate homes and retained only the drawings. They showed a pneumatic mechanism capable of storing a sequence of organ notes on perforated rolls. Beside the music channels ran a second pattern of holes, labeled letters. Alice and an organ builder named Josiah Harland had devised a way to encode names and figures into performances. The parchment carried a wax impression, but its outer edge had fused to the tin. Opening it without damage required patience. Marian softened the cylinder with gentle warmth, lifted the parchment a fraction each day, and copied every visible mark. Meanwhile, the school's survival demanded money. Marian organized Saturday singing lessons at 6 pence a family and trained older pupils to copy music neatly for nearby churches. Samuel built portable book stands. Nell proved exceptionally quick at reading harmony and began assisting the younger children for wages of 2 shillings a week. These earnings paid coal and food, not 27 pounds in disputed rates. Mr. Crew's inspection approached. Mr. Pritchard visited alone. He looked older than at the will reading. "Your mother asked me once whether a trustee could purchase trust land. I answered that he could not purchase it secretly. I did not understand her purpose." "Who was trustee?" "Your grandfather, then your father. Edmund succeeded him under a private family settlement." Marian showed him the brass plate. His hand shook. "Harland's name appears in an old probate index. His papers may have gone to York." "Will you testify?" "I will verify documents. Do not ask me to accuse a client upon conjecture." It was less than courage, but more than silence. The open parchment proved to be a schedule of donations. Quarry owners, chapel members, and Alice herself had endowed a free school with 2 cottages and income from a limestone wharf. Signatures filled the bottom, yet the final trust deed was not there. A schedule showed intent, not title. Worse, the wharf now formed the profitable eastern boundary of Edmund's estate. The encoded register rolls supplied the next layer. Marian repaired the smallest bellows with kid leather and built a hand-operated test frame from the drawings. Each roll sounded a hymn phrase, while a pointer traced letters scratched along the rail. The first named donors. The second recorded quarterly sums. The third repeated, "Deed deposited with Harland, duplicate under the voice." "Under the voice?" Nell said. "The singing pipes?" Reed pipes produced voices, flue pipes sang more softly. Marian inspected both and found nothing. For 2 days she pursued the wrong idea. Then she remembered Alice's habit of calling the melody line the voice, regardless of instrument. In the hymn book, the soprano notes of one tune descended below the printed staff in penciled dots. They mapped not pipes, but floor tiles beneath the choir stalls. Edmund moved before she could lift them. A bailiff arrived with an order to seize fixtures for unpaid rates. He tagged the square piano, stove, desks, and organ. "The children's books belong to their families," Marion said. "The organ is fixed to the property," he replied. Mr. Crewe declared the Western Gallery dangerous and forbade entry. The timing was too precise. That night rain became sleet, and a hired wagon waited outside to remove the organ at dawn. Marion faced her moral choice in the freezing classroom. If she broke the official seal to seek the deed, Edmund could call her a thief and close the school. If she obeyed, the organ, and perhaps the evidence, would be dismantled in his warehouse. She sent Nell to gather parents. Before 20 witnesses, Marion explained every document and uncertainty. "I cannot promise that the trust owns this place. I can promise that no hidden paper will be taken in darkness." Samuel removed the unsafe stair treads and built a braced platform from below, satisfying the letter of Crewe's prohibition. Under the eyes of the villagers and constable, Marion followed the penciled soprano pattern across the chapel floor. The final tile lifted to reveal a shallow iron coffer. It was empty except for gray paper dust and a strip of red ribbon. Edmund had known the hiding place. The failure turned the room against her. Mrs. Baines muttered that melodies were not deeds. Even allies went home subdued. During the night, sleet forced water beneath the temporary roof. Part of the infant's ceiling collapsed, crushing the square piano and soaking the copied music that represented 2 months' income. Marion sat among wet plaster as dawn whitened the windows. She had spent £5, 9 shillings. She owed Ezra £1. The school could not open safely. Her discovery had yielded a brilliant mechanism, a schedule, and an empty box. Nothing that stopped seizure. Nell found her there. If Mr. Vale took the deed, why leave the ribbon? Because he had opened the coffer hurriedly, Marion thought. Or because paper had already decayed before he found it. She touched the gray dust. It was not parchment fiber, but wood pulp mixed with black grit. "Carbon paper," she said. The coffer had held a copying book, not the deed. Alice's register message had specified a duplicate under the voice. Marion had assumed the chapel's voice. Perhaps Alice meant her own. Her hymn book's green covers were warped but unusually thick. Marion, trained to respect instruments and books alike, carried it to Beatrice Shaw, the town bookbinder. Under angled light they saw a repaired seam along the rear board. Beatrice lifted the end paper and exposed a thin folded sheet written in Alice's hand. It was not a deed. It was a letter to Marion, explaining that Edmund's father had diverted wharf rents after Alice challenged him. Alice had hidden evidence in the organ because her illness left her little time, and because Marion, then 9 years old, already heard discrepancies others ignored. The letter named Josiah Harlan's duplicate as the legal safeguard and gave an address in York. Marion cried only after Beatrice left the room. Her mother had not been merely keeping a secret. She had trusted the child Marion had been to become the woman capable of hearing it. York lay 40 miles away. Marion could not afford the journey. The parents collected fares in pennies and sixpences. Ezra waived his debt. Mrs. Baines, still skeptical, contributed bread rather than money. Marion and Mr. Pritchard traveled by early train. At Harlan's former address they found a shuttered organ workshop, now owned by his widowed daughter, Ruth Bell. Ruth remembered Alice as the lady who could calculate wind pressure by ear. Harlan's probate papers had gone to a solicitor, but one cabinet remained because its drawers were jammed. Marion recognized on its brass lock the same groups of notches as the false trackers. The musical sequence opened it. Inside, wrapped in waxed linen, lay the executed Orison Educational Trust deed, Harlan's sworn statement, patent sketches, and 20 years of rent receipts copied before the diversion began. The deed granted the chapel school, cottage, and wharf income to trustees for free elementary and musical instruction. It required any successor trustee to publish annual accounts. No sale or mortgage could benefit a trustee personally. Alice's pneumatic register was assigned to the trust so that licensing income would support the school. The invention had never reached patent. Harlan explained why, Alice's father-in-law refused to permit public recognition of a married woman's work and threatened to close the school. Harlan preserved the papers, waiting for Alice or her lawful representative. When illness prevented her return, the cabinet remained locked. His daughter had mistaken it for unfinished business of no value. Edmund's knowledge was incomplete. He had found the empty copying coffer and assumed the deed destroyed. He wanted the building demolished because the trust boundary ran from its eastern buttress to the wharf. Marion returned to Aveling the day before the organ's advertised auction. Edmund had arranged the sale in the assembly hall, presenting himself as a benefactor clearing unsafe property. Quarry owners, parish officers, and families filled the room. The organ's decorative pipes stood stacked against the wall. Marion did not enter alone. Ruth Bell carried Harlan's paper. Pritchard bore the probate index and Alice's letter. Thomas Fenn brought the parish rate book. Samuel and Ezra carried Marion's reconstructed register frame. Edmund laughed when she claimed the trust. A daughter's letter and a theatrical machine do not defeat probate. No, Marion said. The executed deed does. Ruth identified her father's seal. Pritchard verified the witnesses' signatures against 2 wills in his custody. Fenn admitted that the rate entries had been overwritten at Edmund's instruction. The wharf receipts matched the encoded quarterly figures in Alice's rolls, and the sums later absorbed into Ellery's estate accounts. Edmund attacked the invention as a recent fabrication. That flaw defeated him. He declared one brass valve could not have existed in 1854 because he had replaced it himself after finding the wall passage 6 months earlier. The room went still. He had just admitted secret entry and alteration before Marion inherited. Mr. Crewe then confessed that Edmund had paid him to exaggerate the gallery danger and hasten demolition. The constable seized the auction papers and ordered that nothing be removed pending the magistrate's hearing. The reckoning took months, not minutes. Chancery proceedings confirmed the trust and removed Edmund as trustee. He was required to restore diverted rents from the property he had inherited. The estate house was sold to meet part of the judgment. Fenn kept his position after giving evidence but repaid the fee he had accepted. Crewe lost parish work. Evidence of the schoolroom fire was insufficient for a criminal charge. Yet Edmund's interference, false accounts, and attempted seizure were entered publicly against him. Marion did not receive the wharf as personal wealth. She became one of 5 trustees beside Ruth, Samuel, a chapel representative, and an elected parent. That distinction mattered to her. The school had been left to no single savior. It belonged to its purpose. Wharf rents funded a sound slate roof the following spring. Repairs proceeded room by room. Ezra supervised the masonry and trained 2 older pupils. Samuel's hand prevented quarry labor, but not fine joinery. He established a workshop, making school desks and register frames. Nell received a scholarship and wages as a pupil teacher. Ruth and Marion completed Alice and Harlan's patent through lawful successors. Their pneumatic register proved useful for teaching notation and preserving short performances. Licensing brought modest income, never miraculous riches. Each instrument carried both inventors' names. The organ itself required 18 months. Marion refused bright replacements that would erase its history. Sound pipes were cleaned, damaged wood was scarfed, and the hidden register remained visible behind glass with copies of the trust papers. Villagers who had mocked her donated labor after witnessing accounts posted openly each quarter. Mrs. Baines never apologized, but began sending bread for children who arrived hungry. Marion accepted the bread and did not pretend it was affection. On the first autumn anniversary of the will reading, St. Orison's reopened fully. Rain darkened the repaired limestone, but every window held warm light. Quarry children sat beside tradesmen's daughters. Adult pupils filled the rear benches. Above them, the restored organ waited. Marion placed Alice's green hymn book on the stand. For years she had believed her father's contempt proved that work freely given possessed little value. The school had taught her otherwise. Value could be hidden, diverted, mocked, or denied, yet still survive in skilled hands and shared memory. She pressed middle C. This time the key descended freely. Wind entered the pipes, and the note filled the chapel without tremor. Nell joined on the upper line, then the children, then parents who had once stood outside uncertain whether the ruin deserved saving. The final chord passed through repaired timber and old stone into the schoolroom beyond. Nothing in the building was silent now. Not Alice's invention, not the stolen trust, and not the children whose inheritance had at last been returned to them.